A billionaire catches a 7-year-old boy stealing his wallet. Annoyed, he grips the boy's wrist. "Where's your father? Why don't you ask your dad for help?" The boy just looks him dead in the eyes. "I just tried him, but didn't go so well." The Orchard Cafe was the kind of place where time seemed to slow down, with the soft hum of quiet conversation and the gentle clink of porcelain filled. Eric Morgan sat in his usual corner booth, his tailored suit immaculate, despite the hint of stress in the crease of his brow. His gaze was fixed on his phone, fingers occasionally swiping over a screen brimming with urgent emails. He paid little attention to the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee or the delicate clatter of cutlery. In his mind, only the next important call or decision mattered. His fingers moved swiftly over the sleek screen of his phone, skimming through unread emails, approving deals with a flick of his thumb. The steaming espresso beside him remained untouched. He had no time for distractions. Somewhere across the room, a small shadow moved, quick, fluid, purposeful. A boy, barely noticeable in the morning bustle, weaved through the tables with the ease of someone accustomed to being unseen. His steps were light, his eyes sharp, scanning for opportunity. And then, in one swift motion, he struck. Fingers ghosted over the smooth leather of Eric's wallet. A heartbeat, a practiced flick of the wrist. The wallet vanished. A clean getaway, except for one thing. Eric's instincts had been honed in boardrooms and high-stakes negotiations. He didn't hesitate. His hand shot out, fast as a striking snake, locking around a thin wrist. The cafe was still. The boy jerked, twisted, trying to yank free, but Eric's grip was firm. He looked up from his phone, his sharp blue eyes meeting the defiant gaze of a child who should have been afraid. He wasn't. The boy didn't tremble, didn't cry. He simply stared back, his dark eyes holding something older than his years, something that made Eric hesitate. "You think you can take from me and walk away?" Eric's voice was even, but his grip tightened ever so slightly. The boy's jaw clenched. "I needed the money." Eric's brow lifted, more out of curiosity than disbelief. "And why's that?" The answer came without hesitation. "My mum's sick. She needs medicine." A practiced lie, perhaps. Eric had heard plenty of them before, but the way the boy's hands stayed still, the way his shoulders squared instead of cowering, it made him pause. His lips curled into a smirk. "Ever heard of asking before stealing?" The boy's expression didn't change. "Ever heard of people not caring when you ask?" Eric exhaled sharply, amused despite himself. The kid had nerve. "Where's your father? Why don't you ask your dad for help?" It was an offhanded question, one meant to push the conversation into expected territory. Divorced parents, deadbeat dad. A story Eric had no interest in hearing. But what came next wasn't expected. The boy met his gaze head-on. "I just tried him," he said, voice flat. "Didn't go so well." Something uncomfortable flickered in Eric's chest. His grip loosened. The weight of the boy's words pressed into the space between them. There was something disturbingly familiar about the defiance in his eyes, about the way he seemed to be standing on the edge of something sharp and dangerous, refusing to fall. A second passed, then another, and just like that, the moment shattered. Taking advantage of the hesitation, the boy wrenched his arm free and bolted. He was gone before Eric could react, slipping between the tables and out the door like a ghost that had never been there to begin with. Eric didn't chase him. Instead, he stood rooted to the spot, fingers still tingling where they had gripped a fragile wrist. The cafe slowly returned to life around him. Conversations resumed. Coffee steamed. The world moved on. But Eric did not. His mind was somewhere else, stuck on a voice too sharp for a child, on words that shouldn't have meant anything, but somehow cut deeper than they should have. I just tried him. Didn't go so well. Eric sat down, his untouched espresso now lukewarm. A deal had been interrupted and he hadn't cared. The city moved around him in a blur of light and motion. Eric sat in the back seat of his sleek black car, watching streets rush past, the people, the neon signs, the faceless movements of a world he had always kept at a distance. His driver said something about the traffic, but he barely registered it. His mind was elsewhere. The boy's words lingered in his head like a melody he couldn't shake. I just tried him. Didn't go so well. A casual statement, almost flippant, but there had been something beneath it. A weight. A finality. Eric clenched his jaw, turning his attention back to his phone, but the numbers and reports on the screen blurred together. For the first time in a long while, work failed to demand his full attention. As the car pulled up to his office building, the towering glass structure reflected the cold blue of the evening sky. The doorman greeted him with a polite nod, and Eric responded with a brief acknowledgement before stepping inside. The quiet hum of the elevator filled the space as he rode up to the top floor, where his office loomed in silent efficiency. Inside, the air smelled of leather and polished wood. The skyline stretched beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, a testament to his empire. Claire Hudson, his assistant, was already at her desk, scanning through schedules, a glass of whiskey placed neatly beside her laptop. She looked up as he entered, narrowing her sharp eyes at him. Something's off. Eric didn't answer. He tossed his phone onto his desk, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Claire leaned back, crossing her arms. You've been weird since you got back. What happened? Nothing, he muttered. But the hesitation was there, a flicker of doubt. Claire's gaze sharpened. She knew him too well. Let me rephrase. What's distracting you? Eric exhaled, sinking into his chair. His fingers drummed against the polished wood. A kid tried to pickpocket me. Claire's brow lifted, waiting for more. And he wasn't scared, Eric admitted, almost to himself. Most kids would have panicked, run, made up excuses. But he just looked at me. Claire's expression shifted slightly, curiosity replacing her usual indifference. And then he said something. Eric's jaw tightened. He wasn't sure why he was telling her any of this. Maybe because he wanted to hear it out loud, to see if it sounded as strange as it felt. He said he needed the money for his mother's medicine. Claire scoffed. Classic line. That's what I thought too, Eric said, until I asked about his father. She raised a brow, and Eric hesitated. He said, I just tried him. Didn't go so well. Silence stretched between them. Claire set her glass down, studying him for a long moment. Then she leaned forward. Do you think he was lying? I don't know. Eric ran a hand through his hair, something he rarely did. It felt real. Claire tapped her fingers against the desk, considering. Then, casually, she asked, You sure you don't have a kid out there? The words landed like a punch to the gut. Eric's entire body stiffened. Don't be ridiculous. But something shifted in his eyes, something Claire caught immediately. You hesitated, she pointed out. Eric didn't respond. He was already standing, pacing toward the window. The city lights flickered below, an endless sea of movement. He felt utterly still. Madeline Brooks, Claire said suddenly, and Eric froze. Slowly, he turned to face her. You haven't thought about her in a while, have you? He had. More than he cared to admit. But she had walked out of his life 7 years ago, without a word, without a trace. She had been the only person who ever looked at him like he was something other than his net worth, and she had left, as if none of it had ever mattered. Eric stayed silent. Claire, unfazed, continued. "She's the only one you ever—" "Enough," he cut in, sharper than intended. Claire didn't flinch. "I can look her up." A muscle ticked in his jaw. "I doubt she wants to be found." "That kid didn't show up in your life for no reason," Claire countered. "And if there's even a small chance—" "There's not," Eric snapped. But his voice lacked conviction, because deep down, buried beneath years of carefully constructed indifference, something in him wasn't sure. Claire watched him for another beat before turning to her laptop. "Well, that's too bad." Eric frowned. "Why?" "Because I already found her." His breath hitched. "She's still in the city," Claire continued, scrolling through something on her screen. "Not the high-end part, obviously. Small apartment, no social media, no big records. She practically vanished, except for a few hospital bills in her name." A cold knot formed in Eric's stomach. He moved toward the desk, eyes locking onto the screen. An address, a place in a part of town he never would have set foot in before. His fingers curled into fists. The rational part of him screamed to let it go. 7 years. If she had wanted to contact him, she would have. If she had something to tell him, she would have. But the other part, the part that had been unsettled since the moment he grabbed that boy's wrist, refused to stay quiet. Eric didn't realize he had made a decision until he was already reaching for his keys. Claire smirked, taking a sip of whiskey. "I'll clear your evening schedule." Eric didn't respond. Moments later, he was in his car, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the address Claire had pulled up. The city stretched before him, unfamiliar in ways it never had been before. Eric Morgan wasn't driving toward a business deal. He was driving toward the past. The city began to change as Eric drove further from the towering skyline of downtown. The glass and steel high-rises faded into aging apartment blocks, their paint chipped and faded from years of neglect. Sidewalks were uneven, marked by time and disrepair. Streetlights flickered against the dimming sky, casting long, wavering shadows. He didn't belong here. Eric tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his mind calculating the last time he had stepped into a place like this. Never. Every part of his life had been crafted to rise above, to avoid places where people struggled, where survival wasn't a given, but a daily battle. And yet, here he was. The address Claire had pulled up led him to a narrow brick building, the kind that had seen better days but still stood, holding on to its last shred of dignity. The entrance was unassuming, a faded metal door, an intercom with missing buttons. The kind of place that people didn't just live in, they endured it. He cut the engine, but for a moment, he didn't move. This was a mistake. It had to be. Madeline had left without a word. 7 years had passed. She hadn't come looking for him. That meant something, didn't it? But then he saw movement in the window on the second floor. A small figure silhouetted against the dim apartment light, barely visible through the cracked blinds. Noah. His chest tightened. He had no proof, no confirmation, but he knew. The sharpness in the boy's eyes, the quiet defiance. It all made sense now, in a way it hadn't before. Eric stepped out of the car. The hallway smelled of damp wood and old paint. Footsteps echoed faintly above. Distant voices drifted through the thin walls. Every part of this place felt foreign, yet strangely inevitable. When he reached the door, he hesitated. A long, slow breath. Then he knocked. There was silence on the other side. A pause that stretched just long enough to make him wonder if she would ignore it. Then, soft footsteps. The door opened. Madeline Brooks stood in the doorway, and for the first time in years, he had no words. She looked different. Not older, but thinner. Her skin paler than he remembered. Fatigue clung to her like a second skin, but her eyes, those sharp, intelligent, piercing eyes, hadn't changed. She stared at him, expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, quietly, she said, "I was wondering when you'd show up." Eric let out a slow breath. "You're not surprised?" Madeline tilted her head slightly, studying him the way she used to, like he was a puzzle she had already solved, but found mildly interesting to examine. "No," she admitted. "Not really." Something twisted in his chest. 7 years. And she could still read him like this. His gaze flickered past her into the apartment. Small, sparse, clean, but lived in. A blanket draped over a worn-out couch. A table set with 2 plates, one untouched. The faint smell of tea. Then, movement. A small frame stepped out from the hallway, stopping just a few feet behind Madeline. Noah. His dark eyes, wide and cautious, flickered between them. Eric's throat tightened. "That's him, isn't it?" Madeline didn't blink. "You think you have the right to ask that?" Eric took a step forward, his jaw tightening. "Madeline, you don't get to say my name like that." Her voice was even, but the weight behind it hit harder than a scream. Eric swallowed. "You left," he said quietly. "You never told me. You never asked." Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Then, from behind her, Noah finally spoke. "Who is he?" His voice was careful. Too careful. Madeline turned slightly, just enough to look at her son, and Eric saw it. The hesitation, the war inside her. For the first time, she looked unsure. Eric took that moment to meet Noah's gaze directly. He stopped. The words felt foreign, too fragile to speak aloud. Noah waited. Madeline exhaled. Then, without looking at Eric, she said, "He's no one." Eric's chest went tight, but before he could respond, Madeline swayed. Her fingers reached for the doorframe, gripping it weakly as her knees buckled. "Mom?" Noah's voice sharpened with panic. Eric moved without thinking. 1 second standing in the doorway, the next catching her before she could hit the floor. She was light. Too light. Noah grabbed her arm, frantic. Mom, wake up." "She's burning up," Eric muttered, already shifting her weight against him. She was burning with fever, her body unnaturally limp. Madeline tried to push him away, even now, but there was no strength behind it. "Noah," she mumbled, her head lolling against Eric's shoulder. "It's okay," Eric murmured. "I've got you." Eric carried her down the stairs, his grip firm but careful. Noah trailed behind, his breath coming in sharp, uneven bursts. The car door slammed shut as he settled Madeline inside. Noah hesitated before climbing in, his eyes flickering toward Eric, with something too complicated for a child to feel, a mixture of distrust, fear, and something else. A question he wasn't ready to ask. Eric didn't look away. He was used to control, used to knowing what came next. But as he pulled the car onto the road, heading toward the nearest hospital, he realized he had absolutely none. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and quiet desperation. The rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor filled the room, a steady, indifferent sound. Eric stood near the door, hands in his pockets, watching the pale figure on the bed. Madeline lay still, her face drawn and exhausted. She looked even smaller beneath the thin hospital sheets, her skin too pale against the stark white linens. Noah sat beside her, gripping the sleeve of her coat, as if letting go would somehow make her disappear. His face was blank, but Eric could see it. The tension in his shoulders, the way his small fingers curled into the fabric. He was holding himself together, refusing to cry, refusing to break. Eric had seen that kind of restraint before, in himself. Eric wasn't used to feeling powerless. Deals, negotiations, boardrooms. That was his world. He knew how to manipulate numbers, how to read people, how to pull the right strings to make things happen. But here, in this sterile, white room, watching a boy barely hold himself together as his mother lay unconscious, there was nothing to control. A nurse entered, adjusting the IV drip, her gaze flicking toward Eric before settling on Noah. "She's stable now," she said gently. "Her fever's gone down, but she needs rest." Noah nodded stiffly. Eric exhaled, barely realizing he had been holding his breath. He stepped closer, but the second he moved, Noah's posture shifted, guarded, tense. The boy's small body was like a coiled spring, ready to snap if he got too close. Eric hesitated. He had no idea what to say, so he did something he never did. He sat down and waited. Minutes passed. The beeping of the monitor was the only sound in the room. Noah never looked at him, his focus locked on his mother. Then, so quietly Eric almost missed it, he asked, "Is she going to die?" Eric blinked. The question was too sharp, too clinical, too much like something a child shouldn't have to ask. "No," he said firmly, "she's going to be fine." Noah's fingers tightened around the coat sleeve. "People say that, and then they die." Eric felt something uncomfortable lodge in his chest. Noah wasn't just scared, he was preparing for the worst. Eric had no idea what it was like to grow up that way. He could have said something reassuring, something empty, but he didn't. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and said, "She's too stubborn to die." Noah finally looked at him. A flicker of something, uncertainty, maybe even curiosity. Then the door opened. Madeline stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She blinked, disoriented, then turned her head. The second she saw Eric, her expression hardened. "You're still here," she muttered, her voice hoarse. Noah sat up immediately, relief flickering across his face before he buried it beneath his usual guarded expression. Eric leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "Not leaving any time soon." Madeline exhaled sharply, shifting against the pillows. "I don't need you here, Eric." He ignored that. "How long have you been sick?" She frowned. "That's none of your business." "It is now." She scoffed, shaking her head. "This isn't some problem you can throw money at." "Let me stay," Eric interrupted. Silence. Madeline's expression flickered, first with disbelief, then something else. She laughed, a hollow, tired sound. "That's rich. You staying? What, for a few days? A week? A month?" Madeline stilled. Eric's voice was calm, unwavering. "Give me a month. If you still want me gone after that, I'll leave." Her fingers clenched the blanket. "You think a month makes up for 7 years?" "No," Eric admitted. "But it's a start." She looked away, jaw tight. Noah, still silent, watched them both. The boy wasn't stupid. He was listening to every word, watching every movement. Eric knew he was being evaluated. It wasn't a boardroom or an investor sitting across from him. It was a child. And somehow, that made him more uneasy than any business deal ever had. Madeline sighed, pressing her fingers against her temple. "I don't need you, Eric." "Maybe not," he said. "But he does." Her eyes snapped to him. For a second, he thought she might hit him, but she didn't. Instead, she looked away. And that, somehow, felt worse. Noah was still sitting at the edge of the chair, small hands curled into fists in his lap. He didn't speak, didn't react. But Eric saw the tension in his shoulders. Then, without a word, Noah stood up and walked out of the room. Madeline exhaled, rubbing her face. "You're impossible." Eric stood. "I'll take that as a yes." She didn't answer, but she didn't tell him to leave either. Eric stepped into the hallway. Noah was leaning against the wall, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, they stood there, neither speaking. Then, finally, Noah said, "You better not screw this up." Eric exhaled, the corners of his mouth twitching. "That makes two of us." Noah didn't look away, and Eric realized this wasn't going to be easy. It was only the beginning. The apartment was small. Too small. Eric stepped inside, his gaze sweeping over the cramped space. The air was thick with the scent of old wood, detergent, and something faintly citrus. The walls, once white, had yellowed with time, and the furniture looked as though it had been salvaged rather than purchased. The kitchen was barely a few steps away from the living room, where a second-hand couch sagged slightly in the middle. The fridge hummed softly, its exterior covered with faded magnets and a few drawings. A house, a stick figure holding hands with a smaller one. Eric felt like an intruder. Madeline had barely looked at him since they arrived. She moved past him with quiet efficiency, setting a glass of water on the table before dropping onto the couch with an exhausted sigh. Noah, on the other hand, stood near the doorway, arms crossed, eyes sharp with unmasked annoyance. The message was clear. You don't belong here. Eric exhaled slowly, slipping off his jacket. He had spent years negotiating multi-million-dollar deals, navigating the sharpest minds in business. Yet, standing in this small, worn-down apartment, he felt more out of place than he ever had in his life. Morning came with an awkward quiet. Eric had woken early, staring at the ceiling of the small guest room Madeline had begrudgingly given him. The mattress was thin, the springs digging into his back, but he hadn't slept much anyway. He had been thinking about the past, about Madeline, about Noah. The sound of movement in the kitchen pulled him from his thoughts. Determined to at least attempt to contribute, he rolled up his sleeves and stepped inside. Eric had made plenty of decisions in his life, buying out companies, restructuring entire corporations. Making toast, however, had never been one of them. The first batch burned. The second fell onto the floor. The third was charcoal by the time he realized the toaster settings weren't automatic. He frowned at the smoking remains in front of him, wondering how something so simple had gone so wrong. Behind him, Noah snorted. "Charming," the boy muttered. "So, you're actually bad at this?" Eric turned, meeting the unimpressed gaze of the child he was supposed to be trying to win over. "I've made more complicated things than toast," he replied evenly. Noah smirked. "Like money?" Eric arched a brow. "You don't like money?" Noah shrugged. "Don't have much of it, so I wouldn't know." There was no resentment in his voice, just fact. Eric felt something tighten in his chest. "You want to try cooking?" he asked, nodding toward the counter. Noah scoffed. "I'm a kid, not a charity case." Eric considered that. He liked this kid's sharp tongue, even if it made things harder. Still, he stepped aside. "Fine. Show me how it's done then." Noah's eyes narrowed in suspicion, but after a long beat, he grabbed a pan and some eggs. Eric watched as the boy cracked them neatly into the skillet, moving with a precision that shouldn't belong to someone his age. He flipped the eggs effortlessly, then glanced at Eric with a raised brow. "See?" Noah said. "Not that hard." Eric crossed his arms. The kid had a point, but what unnerved him wasn't the fact that Noah knew how to cook. It was why he had to. Breakfast was surprisingly edible. The next challenge, however, was more difficult than any hostile takeover Eric had ever dealt with. Noah sat at the kitchen table, an open notebook in front of him, scrawled with numbers and half-erased notes. Eric leaned over, scanning the math problem. Basic algebra. It should have been simple. Except Noah was watching him like a hawk, waiting for him to fail. "So, you just divide this here, Eric said, pointing at the equation. Then simplify. Yeah. But why? Noah interrupted. Eric blinked. Because that's how it works. Noah tapped his pencil against the paper. That's not a real answer. Eric exhaled, rubbing his temple. It's logical. Numbers don't lie. Noah smirked. So you just make money and let someone else do all the thinking for you? Eric glanced at him. This kid was testing him. And if there was one thing Eric Morgan didn't do, it was lose. He pulled a chair out and sat down. All right, he said, let's do it your way. Noah looked genuinely surprised. Eric picked up the pencil. You tell me what part doesn't make sense, and I'll explain it. Noah hesitated. Then slowly, he pointed to the equation again. They worked through it. It wasn't seamless. Noah still challenged him on every little thing, and Eric was not a patient man. But eventually, the boy's scowl softened, just a little. Maybe, Eric thought, this wasn't impossible. Seeing the cracks in the armor. Later that evening, Eric passed by Noah's room on his way to get water. The door was slightly ajar. He almost kept walking, but then he saw it. Noah was sitting on the edge of his bed, fingers digging into his palms. His breathing was uneven, shallow. Eric frowned. A nightmare. He watched as the boy squeezed his hands so tightly, his knuckles turned white. Eric had seen this before. Not in a child, in himself. The way Noah clenched his fists to ground himself, the way he refused to make a sound. Eric stepped inside. Noah snapped his head up, startled, and for a second, his expression was completely unguarded. Pure panic. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. Noah straightened, shoulders stiff. What do you want? Eric didn't answer. Instead, he sat down in the chair by the desk. Not close, but not far either. Noah eyed him warily. Minutes passed. Neither of them spoke. Eventually, Noah exhaled. The tension in his hands loosened. Eric stayed until the boy's breathing evened out, until his eyes drooped slightly with exhaustion. Then, quietly, he stood. He didn't say anything, but just before he left, Noah mumbled, so softly, it was almost lost to the night. Thanks. Eric paused in the doorway. Something unfamiliar stirred inside him. He didn't respond, didn't turn back. But as he walked down the hall, he realized something had changed. Noah had spent the whole day pushing him away. But tonight? Tonight, he hadn't. The storm arrived faster than any of them expected. Eric had spent his life handling public relations nightmares, knowing that in his world, nothing remained a secret for long. But this wasn't business. This wasn't a scandal that could be solved with press releases and strategic silence. This was his son. And now, the whole world knew. Eric first saw it when he stepped into his office that morning. Claire was already waiting for him, her laptop open, brows furrowed in that way that meant something had gone very, very wrong. You need to see this, she said, pushing the screen toward him. Eric's eyes flicked to the article. Billionaire Eric Morgan's secret son. Who is the mysterious mother? His chest tightened. Below the headline were photos of Madeline and Noah, taken from a distance, grainy but unmistakable. Eric's grip on the desk hardened. Where the hell did this come from? Someone leaked it, Claire muttered. A tip-off to the press, maybe a private investigator. But it's out now, and it's everywhere. The phone on her desk was already lighting up with incoming calls. Reporters, business associates, people who wanted a statement, an explanation. But Eric wasn't thinking about any of them. He was thinking about Noah. When Eric arrived at the apartment, he knew immediately that he was too late. Madeline stood in the center of the living room, her arms crossed, her face unreadable. But it was Noah's silence that made Eric's stomach drop. The boy sat on the couch, knees pulled up, his face turned toward the floor. The TV in the corner was still on. His own face stared back at him from the screen. Sources confirm that billionaire Eric Morgan has been financially supporting a woman and child in secrecy for years. Eric turned it off. Silence stretched. Then Madeline spoke. "I knew this would happen," she said, her voice tight. "I knew the second you walked back into our lives, it was only a matter of time before this came crashing down." Eric clenched his jaw. "I didn't do this, Madeline." "Doesn't matter." She exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples. "It's done. The press won't let this go. They're going to follow him, Eric. They're going to follow us." Noah shifted slightly, but he still didn't look up. "Is it bad?" he asked, voice quiet. Eric kneeled in front of him. "Hey, we're going to figure this out, all right?" Noah didn't respond. That's when Eric saw the bruises, small, faint, knuckles scraped raw, his stomach twisted. "What happened?" he asked, voice sharp. Noah still wouldn't meet his eyes. Madeline's lips pressed into a thin line. His classmates saw the news. They had things to say. Eric's hands curled into fists. Noah lifted his gaze, finally looking at him. And Eric hated what he saw. Not anger, not defiance, just exhaustion, like he had been fighting this battle alone for a long, long time. Eric barely had time to process before Madeline turned on him. "You never think, do you?" Eric blinked, caught off guard. "What?" Madeline's voice rose. "You just show up, say the right things, and act like that's enough. Like it fixes everything. But it doesn't." Eric stared at her. "You think I did this on purpose?" "No," she snapped. "But you didn't stop it either. You didn't protect him." Something inside Eric snapped. "Protect him!" His voice was sharper now. "I have spent every second of the last few months trying to be here, trying to help. And what have you done? Pushed me away at every turn." Madeline stepped closer. "Because I know how this ends, Eric. I know you." Eric's breath caught. Madeline's voice wavered, just slightly. "You leave." Eric stilled. "We have lived well for 7 years without you. We don't need you," she whispered. The words hit harder than they should have. Eric didn't know what to say. Madeline exhaled shakily, turning away. "I can't do this," she murmured. "Not again. Not with him in the middle of it." Eric's throat tightened. "You don't get to make that decision for him." Madeline's shoulders stiffened. Then, so softly he almost didn't hear it. "I'm taking Noah away from here." Eric froze. Noah looked up sharply. "What?" Madeline turned, her face unreadable. "This isn't safe for you. We need to go." Noah's eyes widened. "You mean move?" She nodded once. "We'll find somewhere quiet. Somewhere the press won't follow." Eric stepped forward. "Madeline, don't—" "You're not stopping me," she cut in. Noah's breathing picked up. "But what about Eric?" Madeline hesitated, just for a second. Then she said the words Eric knew were coming. "We don't need him." The room went silent. Eric felt the words like a knife to the chest. Noah's fingers curled into fists. "That's not true," he muttered. Madeline's face softened slightly. "Noah." "That's not true," Noah shouted, standing up. His breath was uneven, his whole body tense. "You can't just leave. You can't just make that choice for me." Madeline looked at him, something uncertain in her expression. But Noah was looking at Eric now. "Are you just gonna let this happen?" Eric couldn't breathe. His whole life had been built around control, around knowing the outcome before it happened. But this wasn't a deal he could negotiate. This was his son, and he had no idea what to say. That night, Eric sat alone in his apartment, staring at the untouched glass of whiskey in his hands. Madeline had packed their bags. She was leaving in the morning, and he didn't know if he could stop her. His phone buzzed. Claire. "They're going through with it," she said quietly. "She's serious, Eric. She's leaving the city." Eric exhaled. "I know." A pause. Then Claire's voice softened. "What are you going to do about it?" Eric didn't have an answer. All he knew was this. He wasn't willing to lose this time. The apartment was nearly empty. Noah stood in the corner, hands stuffed into the pockets of his hoodie, watching as Madeline zipped the last suitcase shut. She moved efficiently, quietly. Years of learning how to disappear had taught her well. She had done it before. 7 years ago, she had left Eric without looking back. And now, she was doing it again. Noah should have been used to it, but this time felt different. This time, someone was being left behind. The air in the room was heavy, filled with things neither of them were saying. A part of him wanted to ask where they were going, but he already knew the answer. Somewhere far. Somewhere where no one could find them. And maybe deep down, that was the part that scared him the most. Because for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if he wanted to leave. The knock on the door made Madeline freeze. Noah didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Eric. Madeline sighed, running a tired hand over her face before standing. "This won't change anything," she muttered, more to herself than to him. She pulled the door open. Eric stood there, looking sharper than he should have for a man who had probably spent the last 12 hours losing his mind. His shirt was slightly rumpled, his tie loosened just enough to hint at the cracks beneath the surface. His gaze flickered past Madeline, straight to Noah. Something inside Noah clenched. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Eric exhaled. "Don't do this." Madeline's grip tightened on the doorknob. "We're already packed." "I don't care," Eric said. "You're making a mistake." Madeline's expression didn't waver. "It's not your call." Eric looked at her, jaw tight. Then he turned to Noah. And for the first time, Noah saw something in his eyes that he hadn't before. Not frustration, not a cold calculation, desperation. It made his stomach twist. Eric's voice was steady, but there was something raw beneath it when he spoke again. "You told me I had a month," he said. "That was the deal." Madeline's lips pressed into a thin line. "That was before you turned our lives into a headline." Eric exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't—" "This is exactly why I didn't tell you back then, Eric," Madeline snapped. "This is what I was trying to protect him from." Noah flinched at the sharpness in her tone. Eric saw it. His expression shifted, anger fading into something more controlled. "I never meant to hurt either of you," he said quietly. Madeline's gaze flickered. For a moment, Noah thought she might actually believe him, but then she straightened, her walls snapping back into place. "It doesn't matter," she said. "We're leaving." And that's when it happened. The words slipped out before Noah could stop them. "Bo ja hua se kong bo kon." The room froze. Noah didn't realize what he had said at first. It had just come out. Instinctive. Thoughtless. But it was too late to take it back. The silence was unbearable. Eric stared at him, not in shock, not in amusement, but in something deeper, something Noah couldn't name. And then, just for a second, Eric's mask slipped. His face softened, his breath catching in his throat, like he wasn't sure if he had heard correctly, like he wasn't sure if he had imagined it. Noah wanted to run. Instead, he clenched his fists and forced himself to stand there. Eric took a slow step forward, his voice quieter now, more careful. "Noah." Noah's heart pounded. Eric knelt down, meeting his eyes at his level. "You don't have to go," he said. Noah swallowed hard. Madeline stiffened. "Noah!" She started. "No," Eric cut in, standing. His gaze didn't leave the boy. "He gets to choose." Madeline's expression darkened. "Eric." "No." Eric's voice was firmer now, unwavering. "You keep saying this is about protecting him, about what's best for him." His eyes met hers. "Then let him decide." Noah had never had a choice before. Madeline had always made the decisions. It was always just the two of them, moving when they had to, changing when they needed to. But now, someone was fighting to stay. Noah looked at Madeline, then at Eric. Something inside him wavered. For years, he had convinced himself he didn't need a father. But then Eric showed up, and now he wasn't sure anymore. Noah took a deep breath, looking down at his shoes. Then, finally, he said, "I don't want to leave." The room went silent. Eric inhaled, his shoulders losing some of their tension. Madeline's face didn't move, but something flickered behind her eyes. A long beat passed. Then, quietly, she whispered, "Fine." Noah's head snapped up. Madeline's jaw was tight, her arms crossed over her chest. She didn't look at Eric. "You want your month?" she murmured. "You have it." Eric nodded once. "That's all I need." Madeline sighed, rubbing her temples. "God help me." But she didn't say no. That night, Noah couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. Had he made the right choice? Would he regret it? Then, out of nowhere, he heard the front door unlock. Noah sat up, just in time to see Eric walk back inside. He had left earlier, probably for a meeting or whatever billionaires did. But now, he was back. And for some reason, that made Noah feel something strange. Safe. Eric noticed him sitting there in the dim light. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then Noah stood up. He walked straight over, wrapped his arms around Eric's waist, and squeezed. Eric froze, completely. Noah didn't say anything. He didn't need to. It was the first time he had ever hugged him. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was real. After a long moment, Eric finally moved. He placed a careful hand on Noah's back. Not tight. Not overwhelming. Just there. Just enough. And then, in the quietest voice, Noah whispered, "I don't want to lose you." Eric swallowed. His fingers curled slightly against Noah's back, a silent promise in return. "You won't." The first time Madeline noticed the change, it was subtle, a small shift in the way Noah carried himself, the way he seemed lighter, looser, as if something had been uncoiling inside him without her noticing. It was in the way he spoke, too. How Eric's name started slipping into conversation without hesitation. "Eric said that car engines are basically like puzzles," Noah muttered one evening while flipping through a book on mechanics. Madeline had been washing dishes, but the words made her pause. A week ago, Noah wouldn't have referred to him so casually. He would have said him or that guy. A deliberate distance. Now Eric had a place in his words, in his life, and that terrified her. At first, Madeline told herself she was overthinking it. Noah was still sarcastic with Eric, still pushed back against him the way he did with everyone. But then, one evening, she heard laughter. Noah's laughter. Not forced, not guarded. Real. She stepped into the living room, watching from the doorway as Noah sat at the table, laughing over some ridiculous joke Eric had told. Eric sat across from him, leaning back in his chair, arms crossed, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. She hadn't seen Noah like that in a long time. Not since he was younger. Not since before he learned that the world had sharp edges. Madeline's stomach twisted. She should have been happy. Instead, all she felt was a quiet, growing panic. Because what if Eric left? What if he walked away again and Noah was left behind to pick up the pieces? Could she really trust him? Or was she setting Noah up for heartbreak? The weight of that fear followed her into the next morning. Madeline had been careful. She always was. But this time, she couldn't let it go. So when Eric arrived that afternoon, she pulled him aside. "We need to talk." Eric frowned at her tone, but nodded. "All right." She led him to the kitchen, arms crossed tightly over her chest. The air between them was different now, no longer filled with the sharp tension of old wounds, but something else, something uncertain. Madeline didn't waste time. "Are you going to leave?" Eric blinked. "What?" Madeline exhaled sharply. "Noah talks about you now. He looks for you. I can see it happening, Eric. He's letting you in." She hesitated. Then, finally, she admitted the thing she had been holding on to for so long. "And I'm afraid that one day, you're going to wake up and decide this isn't what you want." Eric's expression shifted. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, he did something she didn't expect. He stepped closer, not in a way that felt like an argument, not in a way that felt like pressure, but in a way that felt like the truth. "I can't," he said. Madeline frowned. "What?" "I can't walk away." His voice was steady, certain. "I don't want to. I don't even think I know how to anymore." Something inside her wavered. Eric ran a hand through his hair, exhaling. "You were right about me before. I wasn't ready. I was a coward." His voice was raw now, quieter. "But I'm not that man anymore." Madeline swallowed. "How do I know that?" Eric met her gaze without hesitation. "Because I won't let Noah doubt it," he said simply. A beat of silence. And for the first time, Madeline believed him. Letting Eric in didn't happen in a single moment. It happened in 1,000 small ones. It happened in the way Noah started waiting for Eric to pick him up after school, even when he insisted he didn't care. It happened in the way Eric learned how Noah liked his sandwiches. No tomatoes, extra mustard. It happened in the way Noah's sarcasm turned into playful teasing instead of deflection. It was in the way their apartment didn't feel like just hers and Noah's anymore. It was theirs. Madeline didn't know when it changed, but it did. Eric wasn't just a visitor anymore. He was a presence. He was there on the weekends, taking Noah to the park to play basketball, even though Noah pretended he wasn't impressed by Eric's skills. He was there on the nights when Madeline worked late, helping Noah with his homework, even when their study sessions turned into debates about the existence of aliens. He was there when Noah got sick with a fever, showing up at their door with medicine before Madeline even had to ask. She didn't realize how much things had changed until one evening, when she walked into the living room and saw them sitting at the table together. Noah was hunched over his homework, brows furrowed. Eric sat across from him, one hand resting on his chin, watching the problem over Noah's shoulder. "All right," Eric muttered. "Let's go over this again," Noah groaned. "I swear, math is a scam." Eric smirked. "Says the kid who can beat me in chess but somehow thinks basic algebra is too hard." "That's because chess actually makes sense." Eric chuckled. "Trust me, kid, you're going to use math more than chess." Noah huffed, resting his chin in his hand. "Doubt it." Madeline stopped in the doorway. She had seen them interact before. She had watched them talk, argue, laugh. But this was different. It wasn't just Noah letting Eric help him. It was the way Noah trusted him enough to be frustrated in front of him, to not put up walls, to be himself. And Eric, he didn't force his way in. He just stayed. Madeline exhaled. Something inside her eased. She had been waiting for a reason to doubt him. But maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to anymore. Madeline let herself believe. She let herself think that maybe, just maybe, He was here to stay. The envelope sat between them on the kitchen table. Noah stared at it, brows furrowed, his fingers drumming lightly against the wood. He had seen that look on Eric's face before, determined, steady, as if he had already made up his mind. And Noah knew enough about Eric Morgan to understand that when the man decided on something, he never backed down. "What is it?" Noah finally asked. Eric exhaled, leaning forward. "Papers," he said simply. Noah frowned. "Papers for what?" Eric pushed the envelope toward him. "For me to legally adopt you." The words hung in the air. Noah didn't react right away. He just stared, the weight of what Eric had said pressing down on him like a foreign language he wasn't sure he could translate. Adopt. Eric wanted to adopt him. Officially, legally, permanently. Noah picked up the envelope, turning it in his hands. He didn't open it. He could feel Eric's gaze on him, waiting. Not pushing, just waiting. "Why?" Noah finally asked. Eric didn't blink. "Because I want you to know that I'm not going anywhere." Noah clenched his jaw. "You don't need a piece of paper for that." Eric's lips twitched slightly. "Maybe not, but I want one anyway." Noah swallowed, his hands tightening around the envelope. A part of him, the part that had spent years believing people always left, wanted to push this away. But then there was the other part, the part that had started to believe, the part that wanted to believe. Noah's voice came out quieter than he meant. "Are you sure?" Eric leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. When he spoke, there was no hesitation. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Noah's throat tightened. Eric had said a lot of things in the past few months. He had promised a lot. But somehow this felt different. This wasn't just words. This was a choice. Eric's choice. Someone was choosing him. Noah exhaled slowly. Then, without thinking, he pushed back his chair and stood. Eric watched him carefully, expression unreadable. For a moment, Noah just stood there. Then, before he could stop himself, before he could overthink it, he took 2 steps forward and threw his arms around Eric's waist. Eric froze, completely. He stiffened slightly, caught off guard, but then, slowly, carefully, he moved. His arms wrapped around Noah's small frame, holding him like he was something that mattered, something worth keeping. Noah buried his face in Eric's shirt, holding on like he wasn't sure how to let go. Eric's voice was quiet, rough. "So, I'm taking that as a yes?" Noah huffed a laugh, his arms tightening around him. "Yeah," he muttered. "Yeah, it's a yes?" Eric exhaled, pressing a hand against the back of Noah's head. Neither of them spoke after that. They didn't need to. They understood each other perfectly. Madeline watched from the doorway. She had been standing there for a while, unnoticed. She'd heard everything. And now, as she watched her son, her stubborn, guarded, impossible-to-read son, cling to the man who had once broken her heart, she felt something unravel inside her. For years, she had been waiting for the moment Eric would prove her right, for the moment he would walk away. But he hadn't. And watching them now, she realized he never would. Madeline exhaled, a slow, quiet sound. And then she smiled. Eric decides to hold a press conference to officially introduce Noah and Madeline. Just a handful of reporters, the ones Eric trusted enough to keep things from spinning out of control. He had built his career on control, on keeping things measured and predictable. But this was the one thing in his life that wasn't about business. Eric adjusted the microphone, scanning the room. The cameras flashed, but for the first time, he didn't care. "This isn't a business statement," he started, voice even. "It's personal. The room went silent. Eric's eyes flickered toward the front row, toward Madeline and Noah. Noah was sitting beside his mother, arms crossed, trying to pretend this wasn't a big deal. But Eric knew better. He knew how much this meant. "I'm here to confirm something that has already made its way into the media," Eric continued. "Noah Brooks is my son, and today I'm making that official." The murmur in the room grew louder, but Eric wasn't finished. "I want to make something clear. This isn't about optics. This isn't about public perception. This is about family, and I won't let anyone take that away from us." A pause. Then, "I have legally adopted Noah as my son." The cameras went crazy. Noah rolled his eyes, muttering under his breath. "Dramatic much?" Madeline snorted. Eric shot them both a look. Then he smiled for the cameras. Not for business, not for power, but because he had everything he had ever wanted now, and he wasn't going to lose it. The day was warm, the sky a deep, endless blue. A light breeze moved through the open-air stadium, carrying with it the distant hum of voices, the rustle of programs being flipped through, the occasional burst of applause. Eric sat in the audience, surrounded by families of all kinds. Parents, siblings, grandparents, all gathered for the same reason. But for him, this wasn't just another graduation. This was Noah's graduation. And that meant everything. Eric had seen Noah in a lot of different moments. Angry, sarcastic, guarded, vulnerable. But never like this. Never standing tall on a stage, wearing a cap and gown, his eyes scanning the crowd like he knew exactly where to look. For years, Noah had walked through life like he didn't expect anyone to be there when he turned around. But now he knew. Because Eric was there, because Madeline was there, because he wasn't alone anymore. Eric felt something tighten in his chest as Noah's name was called. The audience clapped, a sea of noise swelling around him, but Eric barely heard it. He was too busy watching his son, the boy who had once been a stranger, the boy who had fought so hard not to let him in, walk across that stage. And he wasn't the only one watching. Beside him, Madeline brushed at the corner of her eye, pretending she wasn't wiping away a tear. Eric smirked. "You okay?" She shot him a look. "Shut up." Eric chuckled, but he understood, because even though he wasn't the kind of man who cried, even though he had built his whole life on control, at that moment, watching Noah shake hands with the principal, he had never felt more overwhelmed. The speeches were long. Most of them were forgettable. But then, Noah stepped up to the podium. Eric hadn't expected that. His eyebrows lifted slightly as Noah cleared his throat, glancing down at the paper in his hands. Then, "I didn't really plan on saying anything today," Noah started, his voice carrying over the crowd. A ripple of laughter. Noah smirked, then continued. "Most of you have families that have been there from the start. Parents, siblings, people who have had your back since day one." His expression shifted slightly. "For a long time, I didn't think I had that." Eric felt something shift in his chest. Noah exhaled, tapping the side of the podium. "But I was wrong." A pause. Then, "If I'm standing here today, it's because of my mom, and because of my dad." Eric's breath caught. Dad? He hadn't expected that. Noah glanced toward him, his expression unreadable. "If he hadn't shown up, if he hadn't stayed, I wouldn't be here." Eric swallowed hard. For years, he had built companies. He had built an empire. He had built a life based on things he could measure and control. But this was the first thing that had ever mattered in a way he couldn't describe, and he hadn't even built it. Noah had given it to him. Later, when the ceremony was over, Noah found them in the crowd. Madeline pulled him into a hug first, murmuring something too quiet for Eric to hear. When she finally pulled away, she wiped her eyes again and pretended not to. Then Noah turned to Eric. There was no hesitation. He didn't wait. He didn't hold back. He just stepped forward and hugged him. Eric exhaled slowly, wrapping an arm around him. "Proud of you, kid," he muttered. Noah huffed. Yeah. But he didn't let go right away. Neither did Eric. From the corner of his eye, he saw Madeline watching them. A softness in her gaze that hadn't been there before. And then, she did something he didn't expect. She reached for his hand. Eric stilled slightly, glancing down at their intertwined fingers. Then, he looked at her. Madeline just shrugged. "Noah's not the only one who trusts you now." Eric swallowed. Then, slowly, he squeezed her hand back. For years, there had always been something between them. Walls, distance, the weight of old wounds. But not anymore. Not today. 2 weeks later, they were on a plane. Noah had never been out of the country before, and when Eric had suggested a graduation trip, the kid had laughed. "Dude, I didn't win the lottery." Eric had smirked. "You don't need to." And now, here they were. Noah sat beside him, pretending not to be excited, his headphones round his neck, flipping through a travel guide about Europe. Madeline sat across the aisle, glancing at Eric like she still couldn't believe any of this was real. Eric leaned back in his seat, exhaling slowly. He had spent his entire life chasing things that never filled the gaps inside him. Money, success, power. None of it had ever been enough. But this was enough. This was everything. Noah looked up from his book. "You think I'll like Italy?" Eric smirked. "I think Italy's not ready for you." Noah rolled his eyes. "God, you're so dramatic." Madeline laughed. Eric just smiled. He wasn't thinking about what came next. Because this wasn't the end of a story. This was the beginning of something real, something permanent, something that finally felt like home.